Welcome back to what is Wickerson Studios. My name is Michael Wickerson, and I'm producing these videos for overviews of a workshop I'm doing online for NGSM. And certainly these videos will come in handy to anybody who wants to watch them. They're all available on YouTube for free. And I am running through basic Grasshopper, the ribbon or vanilla items from params through to display. Now I've done the first three sections and I've highlighted what I find most common, what's in use for what I do. And I haven't tried this with a mask on yet, but it's mandated here, so I'll be wearing it, and my glasses will steam up periodically. But I've gone through and done geometry with a few of the primitives, the inputs, and now we're into utilities, which is actually behind my face. So I'll just move this one over here. And you can see I'm going to go through a few of the utilities I find most common, and we may get into some other tools while we do that. So if I zoom in, I want to do this in about 10 minutes. Basically, the exercise is this would be 003, params utility. You want to download bifocals from Food for Rhino. If you haven't done any downloads and gotten the fact that you can go into your special folders, into your component files, and also into your user objects, you want to be able to bring in these nodes that are usually green, they're sometimes purple. You'll want to right click on them, or once you download them, go into properties and ensure that they're all unblocked. If it says advanced, you might have to go into that and see the unblocked, but otherwise you should be fine. And that plugin comes up, and the reason I choose that one to show it is because this plugin shows up in utilities, and when it's dragged into this field, you'll see every node that I have set, and most people know this, ends up getting a name. If I delete it, I'll lose all those names. It doesn't matter how many you have on your desktop. If you bring one in new, it'll put up all those names, and you can work with the icons. And there's another one over there. But if I delete one, it doesn't matter that the other one's still there. It's not functioning. So you always want to keep one up and running. So that's one of the first utility tools that I think most common Grasshopper users use because they want to get into displaying, fancy wires. They want to draw icons, so they start acclimating their eyes to this. There's a fellow on Parametric Camp, Jose Luis, that says pull this down to 3 or 4 bar tabs, so you can also go in and display. I believe it's here. It might be more on edit, file. There's a section in here where you can actually choose to view obscure components. And that, if you don't have that on, you're just going to have a very limited view of what's in here. And of course, bifocals comes up along with these other ones. So just another thing that I want you to think about doing is viewing obscure components. That's a nice little tip, scrolling this down. So I've got quite a few utilities to go through. You see there's quite a few in here, and we're going to end up with Galapagos and things like that. Try and keep this 10 minutes, but I doubt it. These utilities are pretty interesting and pretty diverse. You want to check your properties and unblock, and that's what I just talked about. And you got to close and open Rhino again for these to actually pop up. I'll do a little plug for a plugin that the Dominion's working on. I'm working on that with Daniel Kristev and Peter Davis. Pretty exciting. I've actually got a couple that I haven't built. I have built icons for, but I haven't updated it. This is available on Food for Rhino, and it's a conic plugin solver. So if you do get into getting into plugins, and bifocals being your first one, please check out Conics. We have a great conversation around it. As I trickle through, I want you to play with the path mapper as you go, which is an interesting thing. I want you to display fancy wires. I want you to consider the path indices and elements of what's happening because you're looking at your wires in your panel tools. Think about grafting, flattening, and simplifying, geometry, and baking. And then there's a nice video online example of what to do, and this is one of the YouTube links that I use quite often. Create trying quads from circles. So that's kind of interesting. And then try to create these curves parametrically for points in Grasshopper. So I've got a few examples in here of what I'm running through. Play with the cherry picker, play with the jump tool. You don't know what the jump tool is? This one's actually been deactivated, so I'll just delete it. It's lost its partner. But I'll try and bring one back. And I'll show how that one's in use. I then go down to thinking about clustering, which may end up leading you towards dealing with functions and playing with the plugin hops. And then I've got a data recorder, which I use quite a bit now and have a lot of fun in Galapagos, and the gene pool is one of my favorite tools to use. So let's just take a look at the first one and what I've pulled up here. And there's an awful lot in this screen, so to make it so we're not looking at anything. What I've done is I've created a point and another point. And I've actually done that by just distinguishing this point. I'll hold down shift in this point. and they're on a flat plane, and they're spaced between whatever I want to space them at. Had it set to there. And you can see that that data in a param viewer can be viewed by double-clicking as one branch with one item, which happens to be a point. Or I can double-click and get the tree data, and you'll see there's one branch here with any number of items at the end of it. It just so happens that there's just one. I'm going to be using that panel tool because panel tool is one of the most param viewer is one of the most common tools used in the utilities. What I do is I draw a line between those 2 points, and then I take a look at what that data is. Well, it stays the same. It's still one item, one line with one item at the end of it. I'm then going to divide that curve. You'll see that there's quite a few items that come up, and we end up with 8 points that are in our curved line turns into a double line. And we end up having what looks similar, but there's a little green dot that happened here to indicate, without simplification, that there's a path being built. And you can zoom in and actually see the number of that path, which is now in existence at 0, 0, and there's a number of items at the end of it. So if I double-click this, you'll see that now I have one branch with 8 items at the end of it. So there's little subtleties that change as we go through here. If I do another operation with shattering and extruding, it's still a list, and you can see that we have an operation of this circle being A, this being B, this being C, and that will start to make sense as you see the geometries that I'm actually making. So once again, we've got our points, we've got our line, we've got our shatter, we've got our extrusion, and now we have a linear array going up even farther, and we're going to enter a list of lists. And when you start understanding things as lists of lists of lists of lists of lists, you're going to really realize as you build a rep out of this, and what's happening is vertices, the complexities of these param viewers is one branch with 7 items with its path listed to its operations. This is another way of looking. Now we've separated into 7 branches with another added path. That's actually taken on another node. You can always simplify that and get rid of them, but it's good to look at all your data. Now you've got 3 indices, items at the end of each path, so it's 7 items, rows with 3 columns, or 7 columns with 3 rows. And then we take it through the param viewer and start doing some fun stuff with that. Vertices, counting those independent things at the end of those curves, and those will end up becoming on the red dots, and you see this really wonderful information being given to us. And so now you can follow the paths that change from just 0, 0, 0, and then a single digit. You start seeing second columns come up. And you can make an analogy to a tree with this, because the visualization is right there, drawing a tree, but I like to use the bookshelf idea, which is why my mode of operation here is kind of looking more like a bookshelf. And so that's something I will cover. And of course, the tool that you've been using up until now, hopefully, is the actual panel tool, which tells you specifically what's the end of all of these things. And you can relate the panel tool very quickly to the param tool, whether you like seeing it in this view or in the tree view. I don't really use the tree view too often unless things start to really fork out and have different numbers on them. And you'll see the sense of what's being recorded here, how the branches are indicated by the darker, the gray line that's coming across here, and how your paths are happening here, and then a final grafting, I think, of the object here, that every item is given its own branch. Now, what I've done is then, at that point, introduce, which won't come into us till sets over here on trees. But if you can master these, you can get your head around masks, relative items. It was a wonderful tool to take a look at if you start considering what are the inputs required as guides or as masks, as I've said. Within paths, there's one of the ones with masks right here, split tree, and also shifting paths requiring offsets. There are other ways of writing data into panel tools, which we will get into. But I want you to kind of understand that as the geometry being built and how Grasshopper thinks of that geometry as data as we pump through here and show you how it's actually being recorded and looked at. Very nice tool. So my second example is creating tris and quads from circles. So I thought that was interesting. I just grabbed myself a circle with a certain radius. Here it is. And I can change that. I made it into a surface. You can do that, but there's some shortcuts in the params you've already learned, and maybe you don't know it. You can actually just grab, because Grasshopper is fairly smart. You could make a surface by just putting that into the surface tool and then having it. Once again, I do want you to go in here and ungroup so you don't run into problems. So this item is exactly the same as this item. This is using a component, this is using a container to do the same things. So containers do kind of function in some way as well, manipulated. So I've done a linear array. There it is, off in 4 directions. I've done a shatter of those points, and then I've done a polyline between them, and I can close those polylines or not, but I'm not going to because I want to see these lines of the vertices flatten between the points, all 3 points, including the ends, which you'll notice there's 4 sets of 3, and then over here I have 4 sets of 1, which is the individual polygon. But then I end up breaking it into its points again, walking around it. And you'll see I actually build a 4-point surface, which is very interesting because it doesn't need to be a 4-point surface for a circle. So if I take this shatter back and bring the count back to, sorry, not this one, bring this 3 count up to 4 count, you'll see it actually functions this with a little bit of manipulation as a quad and as a tri. And you'll see I've also paired that as the data, as how it's being visualized as I'm creating geometries. And I want you to go through the param viewer. I want you to click on and off the tree data and have a look at that. And then I want you to relate that to how that's coming out within the panel tools. So a nice little example there. Another one of being able to make tris and quads out of a circle. Of course, it's not going to work if you shatter higher. And what I end up doing, and it's a little trick within my scripts, and you might like it, is I'll set these parameters as integers and to their limit to where they need to go. Or I might do something even farther by double-clicking, hitting quote, hard-coding in 3 and saying, okay, it's got to be a 3, or you can have a choice over here of hard-coding it again as 4, and saying it's got to be a 4. And then I might just take that, throw that into a group, so you can kind of think of that, and that might make a little more sense. And don't touch those things, just swap them out if you want to count. And so that's another way of doing it. I might save a file as that, I might not. So that's just a little exercise thinking about understanding your data and how Grasshopper is actually thinking about it as numerical data and visual representation as trees. Let's just group it, and I should be kind to myself and put it back into my favorite colors. This is a little tricky interface, but I ended up getting it. So now we're going to jump in and see what I did here. We're trying to create 3 curves parametrically from points in Grasshopper, and use internalized curves to script by extracting them. So what I've done is, I showed this in an early video, is all these have actually been hard-coded in from Rhino. I took that curve in Rhino, that curve, and that curve in Rhino, and they're just 3 different curves, and they actually, once again, take out your ungroup, hold down shift, and you can click all 3. You'll see I actually have a curve that starts and ends at those other curves, and I'm going to be able to do some interesting sweeps in here, or make an interesting surface. So I've done something in Rhino, but instead of depending on a 3DM file, I've actually internalized them in here. So if I had to see what I did, I could extract it, and now you actually see there's actually an object here, or sometimes I do that first just to have this away from the form, and I can bake it onto the shelf, and there it is. It's actually back in Rhino. But I'm not concerned with ever working kind of directly in Rhino. I'm leaving them at the SOP to look into that. So these curves, I brought them in, and I said, okay, well, let's divide that one. Let's divide this one. Let's do a rail action sweep, which is getting farther ahead, but getting a very nice surface on here. What is the data looking like in the param viewer? Clicking back and forth from tree, but you'll see the operations of the inner circle to the outer circles allude to what's happening. Sorry for coughing in the mic. And then I'm going to do points on surface. Surface closest point from those points that I generated here as to where they are on the surface, and these ones surface closest point on the surface. And what I've done is I created from those 2 UV points, because they come out of that tool, is I can create an isocurve around that form. That's a very interesting little trick that I'll talk about. Ability to actually grab a surface and then make isocurves that flow along that surface perfectly, to the point that I can split that surface into fragments. And there's your data, all of a sudden getting more components. So where we went here, from one branch with 10 items, I now have one branch with 16 items, because I actually divided it all up. So a very interesting thing to think about. And actually, I should be looking here and say, well, I'm actually 10 items. But I guess I can leave that one on as well. And I'm just going to click back, and it should jump a little bigger. If not, the interface should make that bigger. But that's also telling you exactly what you're dealing with as you move through. And I thought it might be a nice little slip in here to say, okay, I've pre-recorded my index, a cherry picker, like what is happening at index 0. If I scroll down here and go to the first, if I type in something different here to the index, I could scroll. Actually, it's been a while since we used the cherry picker. kind of go in here and see where I can actually type in what I want. I think I go in here, scroll up to 2, and then I get the next listed thing. If I scroll down to 0, I should go back to curve because it's grabbing the 0 on it. Remember, we start counting the 0. So I just use the cherry picker a few times in here just to pick through and show you that that's a nice little tool. Kind of an inefficient way of coding for scripting to keep order, but it's worth having a look at. So there's our surface, and I've done a nice little trick for putting isocards onto a surface that was brought in through Rhino and now is fully parametric and logical and computational in Grasshopper. Very exciting stuff. Group and build a beautiful baby blue, which makes me feel good. The next exercise is pretty small. Clusters are ways to package reusable scripts into nice little nodes. And you literally go up into these utilities, grab your inputs and your outputs, you put them around a function, and here's the cluster I made with my own icons. So if you do this, you might be headed towards development. But if we don't know what's actually happening here, I can put in any plane, I can set the number sliders and generate a ring circle that I have parametric control that's my own kind of node. And these are things that the ribbon tools don't do. If you ever want to know what's in them, you can put a password on it. Of course, I have no idea what password I put in here, so I probably can't even get into my own thing. That's funny. All right, I'm just going to try a bunch of passwords that kind of work, and I have no idea. Well, either way, I can't take a look at what I did, but I basically wrote a script and then I clustered it, and I'll show that in another video. It's silly that I actually used a password that I forgot, so don't do that. But once you have a nice little cluster, a nice little icon like this, yeah, there it is, nodes within it. I'll just have to remember my password. And maybe make a habit of not putting up passwords for your script if you're just keeping them for yourself. Now, into a tool that I've been using a lot through oscillations, and I'll get into this in final scripts. I'm very excited to share the ability of working with data recorders, which literally start to record. So if I don't have a timer on this yet, but if I go in here and I hit a timer, or I can't remember what it's called in Rhino 7, a trigger, and I plug that in and I say I want to grab data out of that on an interval every 50 milliseconds, you'll see when I activate that, it's just doing that. It's grabbing that number at all times. Of course, it's clearing, so whatever I check, but it's a good way to produce a list. It is a nice little tool to figure out and to go and cover it in a little more detail. Another thing I have here is a circle that I generated. What did I do to that? I rotated a gene pool. Fantastic thing to edit and go in and set up. It's like multiple number sliders at once, set to everything you need. So if I take that through pi, because I like dealing in radians, and I do this circle as a rotation, and I'm moving away from the param view at this time, I evaluate the circle as a parameter t, each of these points. So I've obviously gone in here and set my edit between 0 and 1. I'm able to draw lines between those in an interesting fashion, and the center point, which just defaults to 0, 0, 0. I like to build a lot of geometries around 0, 0, 0. I then take the rotation, I take a list item out of it, choosing any one, and choose to pipe it, and then I use what Gene Pool does a beautiful job, at least I find, in pairing parameters to radii through a multiplication function. You have to kind of set this one from 0 to 1, and then you can play off the different radii. And what's nice about Gene Pool is you can just click it, do a major change of it. You can click, if you like the form, you can do a smaller change, and you'll see doing that takes a lot of time. And I start to actually plug numbers and areas and volumes of, say, bounding boxes into a Galapagos tool, which I will show again in the video as we go farther into it. But Galapagos is one of the first plugins that's become part of it that you can do your own optimization on forms and make things fit. I have so much to show you on these videos. So excited about it. These are just little overviews of 003, and you watch them at your leisure, and it might make a little sense that have these playing as you start to think a little farther, a little deeper into what's actually happening in Grasshopper. Params is interesting enough as to where it begins and how your architectures, sculptures, and forms might actually evolve. Thanks very much for watching. That was nearly 20 minutes.